the heart's rebellion, love, career, and commitment. It began like any ordinary relationship, one filled with fleeting moments and delicate promises. There were no grand gestures, no promises whispered under moonlit skies. Yet something ineffable stirred between them from the first glance. The kind of connection that couldn't be explained by reason or logic. It simply was. Lena had always believed in fate, in destiny. She used to say that people met because the universe pulled them together. There had been many times she had been certain her heart had found its match, only to watch the connection wither like a wilting flower. But with Andrew, it was different. She couldn't explain why, but she just knew. There was something about his eyes, the way they lingered on her as if they saw beyond the surface, as if he could peel away every layer of defense she had built over the years. Andrew, on the other hand, wasn't a man who believed in fate. He wasn't cynical, but he was practical. Relationships, he thought, were a matter of compatibility, shared experiences, and timing. He didn't believe that some cosmic force had anything to do with it. But when he met Lena, even he couldn't ignore the pull he felt. It wasn't like any other attraction he'd experienced. There was an intensity to it, something deeper than just physical chemistry. It was as if her presence somehow filled the void in his life he never realized existed. Their first conversation had been simple, like two strangers engaging in the usual small talk. But beneath the surface of trivial words, there was a current that neither could deny. They found themselves exchanging phone numbers before the evening ended, both aware that something significant had begun, but neither willing to admit it. Over the weeks that followed, the connection between them blossomed. They saw each other more frequently, not because they had to, but because they wanted to. Their conversations, once centered around trivial topics, evolved into deep discussions about their pasts, their fears, and their dreams. It wasn't always easy. Both Lena and Andrew came with their own baggage, their own scars from previous relationships and experiences. But they somehow found solace in each other's company, comfort in their shared moments of vulnerability. Andrew would often find himself lost in her smile, the way her eyes would light up when she talked about the things she loved. She had a passion for books, for art, for the simple beauty of the world around her. It was in those moments that he realized how different she was from everyone else he had known. There was an innocence to her, a purity in the way she viewed the world, and it captivated him. For Lena, Andrew's quiet strength and his unwavering support made her feel safe in a way she hadn't felt in years. She had spent so much of her life putting on a brave face, hiding her true feelings behind a wall of composure. But with him, she didn't have to pretend. She could be her authentic self, flawed and imperfect, and still feel loved. They went on countless dates, from cozy dinners at their favorite cafe to spontaneous weekend trips to the countryside. With every passing day, they unraveled more of each other's lives, finding similarities in their struggles and differences in their dreams. But no matter how much they shared, there was always a quiet understanding that their bond was something unique. It wasn't like the relationships they had experienced before. It was something new, something unpredictable. But as the weeks turned into months, the weight of their feelings began to settle heavily on their shoulders. They knew that they couldn't keep pretending that everything was perfect. Their flaws, their insecurities began to surface, threatening the fragile trust they had built. They started to see each other not just for who they wanted to be, but for who they truly were. Broken, uncertain, sometimes selfish, and sometimes distant. And yet, despite all of this, they couldn't walk away from each other. It wasn't easy. There were moments of doubt, moments when they both questioned if they were really meant for each other. The more they got to know one another, the more they realized how much work it would take to truly understand and accept each other's complexities. But neither of them could deny the magnetic pull that had brought them together in the first place. One evening, as they sat on the balcony of Andrew's apartment, Watching the sunset paint the sky in hues of orange and purple, Lena turned to him and asked the question that had been weighing on her mind. "Do you think we're really meant to be together?" Andrew didn't answer immediately. He took a deep breath, his gaze fixed on the horizon as if searching for the answer in the fading light. "I don't know," he said finally, his voice soft yet steady. "But I know that right now, in this moment, I don't want to imagine my life without you in it." It was a simple answer, but it meant everything to Lena. She had always believed that love was more than just a feeling. It was a choice, a commitment to stay, even when things got tough. And in that moment, she realized that she had made her choice. The uncertainty still lingered between them, but it wasn't something to fear. It was a reminder that relationships were never perfect, but the imperfect ones were the ones that mattered the most. They had their flaws, but they also had something far stronger, an unwavering connection that neither of them was willing to let go of. And so, as the stars began to twinkle above them, Lena and Andrew held hands, knowing that their journey together was just beginning. It wouldn't always be easy, but as long as they were willing to fight for each other, they would never be alone. In the days that followed, they learned to navigate the complexities of their relationship, facing the challenges head on with open hearts. They didn't have all the answers, but they had each other, and that was enough. Because sometimes love wasn't about finding someone perfect. It was about finding someone who made you want to be better. And as Lena looked into Andrew's eyes, she realized that she had finally found the one person who could make her believe in the possibility of forever. Months passed since that quiet, transformative evening on Andrew's balcony, yet Lena couldn't shake the feeling that their relationship was evolving, not just in the ways they could see, but in the subtle, unspoken realms that often carried the most weight. It wasn't just the butterflies that greeted her whenever Andrew walked into a room, or the comforting sensation of his hand brushing against hers. It was the deeper undercurrents, the unacknowledged tension that grew between them as their bond deepened. Love, they soon learned, was never a steady state. It was a constant ebb and flow, a series of highs and lows that required resilience. For all the beauty their relationship had offered, the cracks began to appear. Andrew, despite his quiet nature and carefully constructed walls, had his demons. His past, though not one marked by trauma or tragedy, was far from perfect. He was the product of a broken home, raised by a mother who struggled with emotional stability. In his younger years, Andrew had learned to mask his vulnerabilities by retreating into his work and hobbies, keeping people at arm's length. He hadn't allowed himself to truly depend on anyone, not since his parents' messy divorce that left him feeling abandoned in ways words couldn't quite capture. Relationships, he had long decided, were fleeting. So why give his heart fully to something that might eventually fade? Lena, on the other hand, came from a world of complex emotions, but she had always felt connected to others in ways that allowed her to thrive in relationships. Her parents were still together, still working through their own issues, but always present for her. She never lacked love or the sense of safety that came with it. But her heart, fragile as it was, had been broken before. In the past, she had loved deeply, too deeply at times, allowing herself to become entwined with people who couldn't offer her the same devotion. She had been left with fragments of relationships that had shaped her, pulling her between the certainty of love and the uncertainty of betrayal. It wasn't until she had met Andrew that she realized how much of herself she had given away in previous relationships. With him, the risk of opening up wasn't just an emotional gamble. It felt like something necessary. She had come to understand that it wasn't only about finding someone to share her life with. It was about finding someone who saw her for who she truly was and still wanted to stay. But as their relationship continued to unfold, Lena began to notice something unsettling in Andrew's behavior. He had begun to withdraw at times, retreating into a shell in the same way he always had when things got tough. It wasn't blatant. He wasn't shutting her out completely, but there were moments when she could feel the walls he had built around his heart growing thicker. Their conversations, once filled with shared laughter and deep reflection, began to feel more like polite exchanges, surface-level discussions about their days, their plans, their hopes for the future. And then there were the silences, the long, uncomfortable pauses that would fall between them, where neither of them knew what to say or how to fix what felt broken. Lena's natural instinct was to push, to ask what was wrong, to try and fix the rift. But Andrew had always been the type who didn't easily express his emotions. He wasn't angry, not in the typical sense. It was more like he was holding something inside, something he wasn't yet ready to share. Lena knew he wasn't the type to lie, but she could feel the hesitation in his eyes whenever she asked how he was doing. His answers were always the same. Fine, good, no real issues. But they didn't sit right with her. One evening, after another awkward silence had stretched between them during dinner, Lena finally couldn't hold it in any longer. She placed her fork down and turned to face Andrew, her voice soft but insistent. "Andrew, what's going on? I can feel that something's wrong, and you're not telling me. You don't have to pretend everything's perfect." He stiffened, not because he was angry, but because the question caught him off guard. He wasn't ready to confront the feelings that were swirling within him, the nagging doubts that had started to surface. But as he looked into Lena's eyes, he saw the vulnerability there, the openness, the trust. And for a moment, he was reminded of why he'd stayed in this relationship in the first place. The reason he'd allowed himself to feel so deeply in the first place. The truth was, he didn't know how to handle the level of closeness that had developed between them. He had never been good at letting people in, not completely. And now, with Lena, it was harder than he had anticipated. "It's not that simple, Lena," he replied, his voice barely above a whisper. I don't know how to be what you need. I'm not used to letting someone see me like this, not fully. I've always been able to keep my distance, to control my emotions. And now, with you, I feel like I'm losing control, and I don't know if I can handle that." Lena's heart sank as she listened to him. She could sense the fear in his words, the unspoken truth that he was afraid of the very thing she had come to treasure. Their connection. "You don't have to be perfect," Lena said, her voice firm but gentle. "I don't need you to be perfect, Andrew. I just need you to be honest with me. If you're scared, if you're unsure, that's okay. But shutting me out, it doesn't help either of us." Andrew swallowed hard, his gaze drifting downward. He wanted to be open with her, he really did. But there was a part of him that felt like he wasn't worthy of the love she so freely offered. There was a part of him that feared that, eventually, Lena would see his flaws, his weaknesses, and decide that she deserved better. But the longer he stayed silent, the further he pushed Lena away. The thought of losing her terrified him more than he cared to admit. So, after a long pause, he finally spoke, his voice strained but sincere. "I'm scared, Lena. I'm scared of not being enough. I'm scared that one day you'll look at me and realize you deserve more than what I can give." Lena reached across the table, her fingers brushing his, grounding him in the present moment. "Andrew, listen to me," she said, her voice unwavering. "I don't need you to be someone you're not. I just need you to be here with me, to work through this together." Her words were a lifeline for him, a reminder that love wasn't about perfection. It was about accepting each other, flaws and all. It was a lesson he hadn't learned before, but with Lena, he was beginning to understand. He had to let go of the walls he had spent so many years building, because only then could he truly experience what it meant to love and be loved. As the night wore on, the tension between them began to dissolve. The walls that had stood so tall now seemed less formidable. They didn't have all the answers, but they had each other, and that was enough to start. Over the next few days, Andrew began to open up more. It wasn't immediate, and it wasn't easy, But Lena was patient, offering him the space to express his feelings when he was ready. And as they navigated this new phase of their relationship, both of them knew that they had found something rare. A love that could survive the trials and uncertainties of life, as long as they were willing to face them together. And so, they did. Together they began to rebuild the trust that had wavered, knowing that while the road ahead wasn't always clear, they were no longer walking it alone. Days turned into weeks and weeks into months, and though the shadow of uncertainty lingered between Lena and Andrew, there was a new understanding that formed between them, subtle yet powerful. They had faced their doubts, their insecurities, and most importantly, their fears of vulnerability. But the raw truth of their relationship, stripped of pretensions and masks, had become something far more profound than either of them had initially expected. Lena felt the shift within herself as well. The constant tension she once felt when she tried to reach Andrew had softened, replaced with an acceptance of what they were. She had learned to give him the time and space he needed to open up, just as he had begun to learn that she wasn't going anywhere, that her love wasn't contingent on his ability to be perfect. It wasn't always easy. There were days when the weight of their differences felt too much to bear, but those moments were becoming fewer. The love they shared, though imperfect, felt more real than any she had known before. But as they grew closer, they also started to notice new challenges emerging, challenges they hadn't anticipated. It wasn't that their bond had lost its strength. It was the external pressures that started to creep in. The first major obstacle appeared in the form of Andrew's career. He had always been dedicated to his work, pouring long hours into his job, rising early and staying late to ensure everything ran smoothly. But recently, his work had been demanding even more of his time. He was given a project that required him to travel for extended periods, and though he hadn't expected it, the toll on their relationship became more apparent with each passing day. Lena had always respected Andrew's dedication, but as his absence grew more frequent, a nagging loneliness began to creep into her heart. She knew he was doing it for them, to build a future where they could have stability, comfort, and the freedom to pursue their dreams, but the absence of his presence started to feel more like an ache, a quiet void she wasn't sure how to fill. It wasn't just the distance, but the emotional toll of him being emotionally unavailable when he was home. When Andrew was around, his mind was often elsewhere, lost in thoughts of work or the pressures he had left behind on his travels. Lena understood. He was a man who carried the weight of his responsibilities on his shoulders. But she couldn't ignore the growing divide between them. One evening, as they sat in the dim light of their favorite cafe, Lena decided that the silence that had stretched between them for days had gone on long enough. She set her cup of coffee down, her fingers tapping nervously on the rim as she tried to find the right words. "Andrew," she began softly, her voice trembling slightly. Miss you." Andrew's gaze lifted from the table, his brow furrowing slightly. He knew what she meant, but hearing it out loud made the weight of his own guilt press harder against his chest. "I'm here, Lena," he replied, his voice carrying a hint of defensiveness. "I haven't gone anywhere." As she sighed, her heart aching as she tried to put her feelings into words. "Physically, yes, you're here. But emotionally, it feels like you're not. It's like I'm with you, but I'm alone at the same time. And I don't know how to fix it." Andrew's expression softened as he leaned forward, reaching for her hand across the table. "I don't mean to make you feel that way. I'm sorry if I've been distant. I'm just trying to make sure we have a future, you know. Trying to make sure I can provide. But I understand that it's been affecting us. It's not fair to you." The vulnerability in his voice struck a chord in Lena. She could hear the exhaustion in his words, the weight of his self-imposed responsibilities. But she also felt the strain of being the one who always tried to reach him, to make him see that love wasn't just about stability. It was about presence, about showing up in the small moments, not just the grand gestures. "I know you're trying, Andrew," she said softly, squeezing his hand. "But I need you too. I need you to be here. Not just physically, but emotionally. And I'm not asking you to change who you are. I just want us to find a way to balance everything." There was a long silence, and for the first time in weeks, they found themselves truly listening to each other. Andrew could feel the weight of her words sinking in. It wasn't about his job. It was about his presence in their relationship, about being there in the moments that mattered. He had always thought that providing was the way to show love, but he was beginning to realize that it was about something more intangible. The way he connected with her, the way they communicated, the way they made each other feel valued. "I'll try," he said, his voice quiet but sincere. "I can't promise that things will change overnight, but I will try. I don't want to lose you, Lena." And in that moment, she realized that their love wasn't about perfection. It wasn't about having everything figured out. It was about their willingness to confront the challenges together, to navigate the hard conversations, and to evolve as individuals and as a couple. It wasn't always going to be easy, but the fact that they were both willing to try made all the difference. As the evening wore on, Lena and Andrew talked for hours, not just about their struggles, but also about their hopes for the future. They shared dreams of traveling together, of building a home filled with laughter and love. The conversation wasn't about solving all of their problems. It was about reconnecting, about reminding each other why they were willing to fight for their relationship. Days passed, and while their relationship wasn't magically healed, there was a palpable shift in their dynamic. Andrew began to make an effort to balance his work with his personal life, setting aside time to be fully present with Lena. He started to prioritize their relationship, even if it meant sacrificing some of his professional ambitions. It wasn't easy for him. The pressure to succeed was still there. But he began to understand that his success meant nothing without the love and connection he had with Lena. For Lena, the change wasn't immediate, but it was there. She noticed the small things. The way Andrew would text her during his breaks, the way he would make an effort to talk about his day, the way he would hold her at night without words, just the silent reassurance that they were in this together. But as their relationship began to find a new rhythm, the past reared its head once again. Andrew's ex-girlfriend, Emily, reached out unexpectedly. It wasn't anything overtly alarming, just a message asking how he was doing. But it stirred something deep within him. It wasn't that he still had feelings for her. It was that seeing her name on his phone reminded him of a chapter of his life he thought he had left behind. It reminded him of a time when he had been with someone who hadn't understood him the way Lena did. Someone who had made him feel like he was never enough. But as Andrew read the message, a realization began to form. He wasn't that person anymore. He wasn't the man who needed validation from past relationships to feel whole. He was with Lena, and she was everything he needed, everything he had ever wanted. He showed the message to Lena later that evening, explaining the situation. It wasn't a test of trust, but rather an opportunity to demonstrate his commitment to her. She listened, her face softening as she understood his feelings. There was no jealousy, no insecurity in her reaction, just a deep understanding that they had both grown. "You're with me, Andrew," Lena said, her voice steady and reassuring. "And that's what matters. I trust you. And I trust us." In that moment, the last of the doubts that had lingered between them vanished. They had learned to trust each other, not just with their hearts, but with their vulnerabilities, their fears, and their pasts. And as they stood there, hand in hand, they realized that love was never about perfection. It was about finding the courage to be open, to share the difficult parts, and to grow together no matter what the future held. The winds of change had begun to settle into a familiar rhythm between Lena and Andrew. Though the road wasn't without its obstacles, they had learned how to navigate the terrain together. Their relationship had entered a new phase, a delicate balance between personal growth and shared love, where each of them could be their truest selves, while still remaining bound by their unwavering connection. But as the months passed, they began to realize that the foundation they had built was far from impervious to the pressures of life. Andrew's job continued to demand more from him, but he found ways to balance it better, leaving work at work and dedicating his evenings to Lena. He took her on small, spontaneous dates, dinners at their favorite restaurants, late-night walks through the city, moments that reminded them why they had fallen in love in the first place. Yet, despite his efforts, there were days when the weight of his responsibilities still bore down on him, and he couldn't help but retreat into himself. Lena, ever patient, continued to support him, but she began to wonder if, one day, the scales might tip in the wrong direction. Lena, for her part, had also evolved. The woman who once craved constant reassurance had learned how to find strength within herself. She realized that while Andrew's presence brought her peace, her sense of self-worth didn't depend on him. She pursued her passions more fervently, working on her art, volunteering, and re-establishing friendships that had faded in the past. She understood now that a healthy relationship wasn't about two people clinging to each other for emotional survival. It was about two individuals coming together to complement one another. But even as they grew individually, life continued to throw curveballs. Their personal journeys would intertwine once again, but this time, the challenge they faced wasn't external. It was internal. It was the kind of challenge that forced them to question everything they thought they knew about love, loyalty, and themselves. It all started with a conversation, one that seemed innocent enough at first. One quiet Sunday afternoon, as Lena and Andrew sat on the couch, the world outside still and calm, Lena brought up the subject of the future. They had talked about it in passing before. Plans, dreams, where they saw themselves in the years to come. But this time, the conversation felt heavier. "You know, Andrew," Lena said, her voice soft, almost hesitant, "I've been thinking a lot about where we're headed." Andrew looked up from his phone, his brow furrowed slightly. "What do you mean?" "I mean, us," she said, meeting his gaze. "I know we've talked about our goals, but I feel like we're on different timelines. I'm starting to think about settling down, about building something more permanent. But I don't know if you're on the same page." For a moment, Andrew didn't respond. His eyes flickered to the side, and Lena could see the wheels turning in his mind. She could tell that the question had caught him off guard. He hadn't expected it, not so soon. "I mean, I'm not in any rush." "Lena," he said after a long pause, "I want to be with you, but you know how I feel about commitment. It's not that I don't love you, it's just that I've never really been the type to think about things like marriage or long-term commitments. I've always been focused on the here and now, on the next thing. But you've always been more of a planner. You've always known what you wanted." Lena's heart sank at his words. She had always known that Andrew wasn't someone who would jump into a commitment easily, but hearing him say it aloud brought a sense of finality to the conversation that she hadn't anticipated. The truth was, she had always believed in the idea of a future with him, a future that included stability, family, and the kind of security that came from knowing they were in it for the long haul. But now, she found herself questioning whether that vision was possible. "So, you're saying that you don't want what I want?" she asked quietly, the words feeling heavier than she'd intended. She could feel the weight of the question settle between them, a silent chasm forming where their dreams used to align. "No, that's not it," Andrew replied quickly, reaching for her hand. "I do want a future with you. But I think we're just on different timelines. And I don't want you to feel like you're waiting for me to catch up." Lena pulled her hand back, her mind racing. She had always believed in meeting in the middle, in finding compromise where dreams and desires clashed. But now, the thought of waiting for Andrew to come around, to suddenly share the same vision she had for their future, felt like something she couldn't control. She sat there in silence for what felt like an eternity. She knew Andrew's feelings for her were real, but the uncertainty in his words lingered in the air like smoke, leaving her unsure of where they stood. She had spent years waiting for a relationship that felt secure, one where she could feel grounded in the knowledge that they were both on the same page. But now, it seemed like they were reading from different books entirely. "I don't know if I can keep doing this, Andrew," Lena said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "I need someone who's ready for the same things I am. I can't keep waiting around for something that may never happen." Andrew's face fell, and he reached out to her again. But Lena stood up, her heart pounding. She couldn't bear to look at him, knowing that they had reached an impasse. She wasn't sure if they would be able to move forward, not without compromising parts of herself that she wasn't willing to let go of. "I love you, Lena," Andrew said, his voice shaking. "But I don't know if I'm ready for all of that yet. I don't want to lose you, but I don't want to promise something I can't give you either." But Lena felt the tears welling in her eyes, but she didn't let them fall. She had never wanted to be in this position, where love and uncertainty collided. But the reality was clear: their paths had diverged, and she wasn't sure if there was a way back. "I don't want to lose you either," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "But I can't keep giving myself to something that's not moving forward. I've spent too much of my life in relationships where I felt like I was waiting for something that never came. I can't do that anymore." The silence that followed was deafening. It wasn't the kind of silence that offered peace, but one that spoke volumes of the distance that had grown between them. They both knew the truth now. They had reached a crossroads. Andrew stood, his hand outstretched, but Lena stepped back, her heart heavy with the weight of the decision she had made. She didn't want to walk away from him, but she knew that holding on to something that wasn't meant to be would only lead to more pain in the long run. "I think we need some time apart," Lena said quietly, the finality in her words hanging in the air. "I need to figure out what I want, and so do you." Andrew nodded, his face a mixture of sadness and understanding. "I never wanted to hurt you, Lena. I care about you more than you know." Lena wiped away a single tear that had escaped, but her heart remained resolute. "I know. But sometimes, caring isn't enough." And with that, Lena turned and walked out the door, leaving behind the man she loved and the future they had once dreamed of together. The days after Lena left Andrew were a blur, filled with an odd mix of clarity and confusion. On the one hand, she knew that walking away from him was the right decision. The weight of her own desires, her need for stability and certainty, had become too much to ignore. But on the other hand, the ache of leaving someone she had loved so deeply gnawed at her soul. She missed him in ways she hadn't expected. Missed the quiet moments they shared, the way his hand fit so perfectly in hers, the way they had built something together that felt so real. She threw herself into her work, into the small comforts of her everyday life, but the absence of Andrew lingered like an uninvited guest. It wasn't just the space he had occupied in her physical world, it was the emotional space he had filled, one that now felt empty and void. The apartment, once a place of warmth and shared laughter, now felt silent. Lena found herself wandering through rooms that no longer held the same meaning, her eyes lingering on the small things that had once mattered. His coat on the back of the chair, the books they had read together, the picture they had taken on their first vacation. Each one was a reminder of the life they had almost built, a life that had slipped through her fingers like sand. But even as the ache of their separation settled in, Lena knew deep down that she had made the right choice. She couldn't continue to live in a relationship that wasn't aligned with her vision of the future. She couldn't keep sacrificing parts of herself in the hope that Andrew would someday catch up to her dreams. She had to honor her own path, even if it meant walking alone for a while. Andrew, too, struggled with the aftermath of their separation. He spent long hours at work, as he always had, but even the long hours couldn't drown out the silence in his apartment. He found himself replaying the last conversation they had, hearing Lena's words over and over in his mind, each repetition slicing deeper than the last. He had always known that Lena wanted something more, but he had never fully understood how much it meant to her. How crucial it was for her to build a life with someone who shared her long-term vision. He missed her too, more than he could admit to himself. But where Lena had been ready to move forward, to take the next step, Andrew was still unsure. He had always been someone who avoided commitment, unsure of how to give all of himself to another person. His past had taught him to keep his emotions guarded, to keep things at a distance. And yet, with Lena, he had allowed himself to be vulnerable, to open up in ways he had never done before. But vulnerability came with a cost, and now he was left to face the consequences. In the weeks following their breakup, Andrew began to question everything about his life. He thought about his job, about the choices he had made, about the future he had envisioned for himself. He realized that he had spent so much time building a life that was centered around work and stability that he had forgotten about the importance of the people around him. The people who mattered most. Lena had challenged him in ways he hadn't been prepared for. She had forced him to confront his fears, his reluctance to commit, and his inability to let go of control. And now, he was left with a deep sense of regret. Regret that he hadn't been able to meet her halfway, regret that he hadn't been able to give her the future she deserved. It wasn't until one night, several weeks after their breakup, that Andrew found the courage to pick up his phone and text Lena. He had spent so much time wrestling with his own doubts, but now he realized that if he didn't take the chance to make things right, he would lose her for good. The message was simple, but it carried the weight of everything he had been feeling. Lena, I know I've hurt you, and I know I can't change the past. But I want you to know that I've been thinking about everything you said, and I'm ready to try. I'm ready to be the person you need. If you're willing to talk, I'd love the chance to see you again. He sent the message and immediately regretted it. He stared at his phone, waiting for her response, but none came. For hours, he checked his phone, each time growing more anxious, more uncertain. He knew it was possible that she had moved on, that she had found peace in the decision she had made. But still, he couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to their story, something unfinished, something worth fighting for. The next morning, as he sat at his kitchen table with a cup of coffee, his phone buzzed. His heart skipped a beat as he saw Lena's name on the screen. He took a deep breath, gathering the courage to open her reply. Andrew, I don't know what to say. It's been hard, but I've been doing a lot of thinking too. I'm not sure where we go from here, but I'm willing to talk. Let's meet. A surge of hope filled Andrew's chest. She was willing to meet. There was a chance, however small, that they could work through this. He quickly responded, arranging a time to meet at a cafe they had once frequented, the place where their relationship had blossomed in its early days. It felt like fate, as if the universe had conspired to bring them back to that moment, to that place. When the day arrived, Andrew arrived early, his hands shaking as he waited for Lena. He had no idea what they would talk about, where their conversation would go, but he knew that this was his chance to make things right. To show her that he was ready to commit, to give her the future she deserved. Lena arrived shortly after, her expression calm but guarded. She looked different, more at peace, more certain of herself. She had spent weeks reflecting on their relationship, on what she truly wanted, and she had come to realize that her decision to walk away wasn't just about Andrew. It was about herself, about claiming her own independence and ensuring that her future wasn't dictated by someone else's hesitations. She said softly, sitting down across from him. He? Andrew replied, his voice hoarse. There was a brief silence between them, one that wasn't uncomfortable, but heavy with the weight of their past. Neither of them knew where to start, but both knew that they needed to speak honestly if they were going to have any chance of moving forward. "I've been thinking about everything," Lena said after a moment. "And I've realized that it wasn't just about us being on different timelines. It was about the fact that I was waiting for you to change, waiting for you to see what I wanted. And in doing that, I lost sight of who I am. I became someone who was holding on, trying to make things work even when they weren't." Andrew listened intently, feeling the sting of her words, but also a sense of understanding. "I know I've made mistakes," he said, his voice steady. "And I don't expect things to just go back to how they were. But I've been thinking a lot, and I realize now that I wasn't being fair to you, to us. I've always been afraid of commitment, afraid of losing myself in someone else. But I've seen now that it's not about losing yourself. It's about finding someone you can grow with. And I want that with you." Lena's heart softened as she heard his words, but there was still a part of her that remained cautious. "Andrew, I've always loved you, but I've also had to learn how to love myself more. I don't want to lose who I am in this relationship. I want us to be able to build something together. But I also need to know that we're both on the same page, that we can grow together, not just side by side." The conversation wasn't easy, and it wasn't without its tears. But by the time they parted ways that afternoon, there was a renewed sense of understanding between them. They weren't ready to jump back into what they had, but they were willing to take the time to rebuild, to rediscover the foundation that had once been so strong. As they walked away from the cafe, both of them knew that their journey was far from over. They had a long road ahead of them, one that would require patience, communication, and the willingness to evolve together. But for the first time in a long while, they both felt the spark of hope. Hope that this time they could truly make it work. The days following their heartfelt conversation felt like the beginning of a new chapter. Neither Andrew nor Lena knew exactly what that chapter would look like, but both had come to understand that their journey together wasn't a destination to be reached overnight. It would be a process, one that required commitment, patience, and above all, trust. The shift between them was subtle at first, but it was there. It was in the small gestures, the quiet moments when they simply existed in each other's presence without the pressure of expectations. Lena noticed it in the way Andrew had started to be more present, not just physically, but emotionally. He was more open, more willing to share his thoughts, even when they were difficult. And Andrew, in turn, noticed the way Lena had allowed herself to let go of the past, embracing their future with a quiet confidence that had once been overshadowed by her fear of being hurt. They began to spend more time together, not out of obligation, but because they wanted to. Their dates, once filled with uncertainty, were now filled with laughter and genuine connection. They still had their moments of doubt, their moments of frustration, but they learned to navigate those moments with respect and understanding. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. One evening, as they sat on the balcony of Andrew's apartment, watching the city lights twinkle in the distance, Andrew turned to Lena, his eyes soft with a quiet determination. "I've been thinking about something," he began, his voice steady. About us and where we're going. And I know I've said this before, but I think I finally understand what you mean about being on the same page. It's not just about finding the right timing. It's about being willing to build something together, no matter how long it takes." Alina looked at him, her heart swelling with a mixture of affection and uncertainty. "I've thought about that too, and I think you're right. It's not just about where we are now, but about where we want to go and how we can make it happen together." There was a long pause, a comfortable silence that spoke volumes about how far they had come. Lena reached over and took Andrew's hand in hers, feeling the warmth of his fingers against her skin. They didn't need to say anything more. The understanding between them was enough. They had fought their battles, faced their fears, and now they were standing side by side, ready to face whatever came next. But life, as always, had its own plans. A few weeks later, Andrew received a job offer that would require him to move to another city. The position was a significant step up in his career, one that could lead to even greater opportunities in the future. It was everything he had worked for, everything he had dreamed of. But when he received the offer, a part of him hesitated. It wasn't the job itself that caused the uncertainty. It was the thought of leaving Lena behind. He had spent years focused on his career, building a life that revolved around ambition and stability. But now, with Lena in his life, he found himself questioning his priorities. He didn't want to make the same mistake he had before, placing his career above the relationships that mattered most. As he sat across from Lena one evening, the letter with the job offer in his hands, he knew the time had come for another conversation. This wasn't just about the job. It was about their future. It was about how far they were willing to go for each other. "I got the offer," Andrew said quietly, his voice carrying a weight he hadn't anticipated. "It's everything I've been working for, but I don't know if I can take it." Alina looked at him, her heart sinking as she realized what he was saying. She had always known that Andrew's career would be a significant part of his life, but now, it felt like their future together was hanging in the balance. "Oh, why don't you want to take it?" she asked softly, her voice filled with both concern and understanding. "It's not that I don't want it," he replied, his fingers tightening around the letter. "It's just that I don't know what it means for us. I don't want to make the same mistakes I made before. Lena, I don't want to put my career above everything else. I want to make this work with you." Lena's heart ached as she listened to him. She understood his fear, his hesitation. She knew that Andrew had spent so much of his life alone, focused on his goals, that the idea of putting someone else first felt foreign to him. But she also knew that this wasn't just about his career. It was about their partnership, about building something together, no matter where life took them. "You don't have to choose between me and your dreams, Andrew," she said softly. "I want you to have everything you've worked for. But I also want us to find a way to make it work, no matter where you are. We're a team. I'm not asking you to sacrifice your dreams for me. I'm asking you to let me be a part of them." Andrew looked at her, his eyes filled with a mixture of admiration and love. For the first time, he realized that love didn't mean giving up on your dreams. It meant finding someone who was willing to walk beside you, even when the path ahead was uncertain. He smiled, a small but genuine smile. "You're right," he said, his voice filled with quiet conviction. "I can't do this without you." In that moment, everything shifted. They both knew that their future wasn't about choosing between one thing or another. It was about finding a way to build their lives together, no matter where they were or what challenges they faced. The decision wasn't easy. It took time, reflection, and a lot of honest conversations. But in the end, Andrew accepted the job offer. But this time, he did it with a plan. He and Lena talked about how they would make it work, how they would prioritize their relationship, how they would stay connected no matter the distance, and how they would keep building the life they had started together. As the weeks passed, Lena found herself excited for what lay ahead, not because everything was perfect, but because they were in this together. She knew that love wasn't about avoiding the hard choices. It was about facing them with someone who was willing to fight for you. And that was what they had found in each other. Months later, as they stood on the rooftop of Andrew's new apartment, looking out over the city that was now their shared home, Lena felt a sense of peace settle over her. They had made it through the hardest parts, through the doubts, the fears, the heartbreak. And now, they were finally starting to build the life they had always dreamed of. "I'm glad we're here," she said softly, her hand resting on Andrew's chest. I meant to," Andrew replied, his arms wrapping around her. "I'm glad I didn't let you go." They stood there in silence, the city stretching out before them, a symbol of the future they would build together. It wasn't going to be easy. There would be obstacles, setbacks, and moments of doubt. But for the first time in a long while, they both knew that they were ready to face whatever came next. Together, and as the sun set behind them, they knew that their hearts, once uncertain and fragile, had found a home in each other. They had built something stronger than they had ever imagined. A love that could withstand the storms, a love that was theirs to protect, nurture, and grow. And, for the first time, they were certain of one thing: they had found their forever. Enjoyed the video? Give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, and tap the bell so you never miss an update.